welcome to everybody. It's fantastic to, even though I can't see all of you, to see all of your names on the screen and to be sharing a few ideas this morning. As Vikeshni said, the first half an hour or so, I'm going to be talking through a few slides and sharing a few ideas and concepts with you guys. If you want to make notes of specific things that you want to ask, and obviously you can raise them in the Q&A sidebar as well, then we'll handle those in the end. But welcome everybody and thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start, or as an introduction perhaps we should have a quick conversation about what does engagement and productivity mean. So when we talk about driving engagement and productivity when teams go remote, what is it that we are focusing on? If you look at the concept of engagement in popular psychology and business psychology at the moment, you will find quite a few different definitions. The definition that we like to use at Thomas International is one that says engagement is a measure of the discretionary effort that people put into their work. So how much are people willing to put into their work in addition to that which you ask of them? So obviously you expect somebody to work a certain amount of hours, or you expect them to reach certain outcomes. A disengaged employee would be somebody that tries to get away with as much as possible, that tries to do as little as possible, just in order not to be fired, just in order to make it through the next performance panel, in order to be able to survive the next annual review, that kind of thing. Disengaged employees are normally people that are looking already for other jobs. They're very open to other offers from other companies. And they're willing to move for the same or a slightly increased salary. A highly engaged employee, on the other hand, is somebody that really puts in the discretionary effort. It's somebody that is highly motivated, somebody that really wants to do their work, that wants to do it well. It's the type of person that doesn't complain when you ask them to do something extra, or in many circumstances, they would actually offer to do something extra or to put in the extra effort. Now, the link between engagement and productivity is then almost assumed, and we almost don't need to discuss that further from a psychological point of view. So if somebody is highly engaged, it means they work harder, and it means that they become more productive. Obviously, there are other factors that have an impact on productivity, such as technology and tools and knowledge and those type of things. But if we look at this from a psychological point of view, the biggest factor in productivity is somebody's level of engagement. Now, if we take that one step further and we look at a little bit of research that we've done in Thomas over the years, and a few other companies have done similar research which confirms exactly this, the biggest factor in the engagement of an employee is their manager's approach to managing them. Please note again, the biggest factor is not how comfortable my workspace is, or how nice the cafe is at work, or what the benefits are. Those things are important, but the biggest driver of engagement is my relationship with my manager and the way in which my manager manages me. That brings us back to the old adage that says that people join organizations and they leave managers. More often than not, if somebody leaves an organization, it will be because they don't get along with their manager. And that is obviously, as we said, an indication of a disengaged employee. So today we're going to talk about engagement and productivity when teams go remote. And when we talk about engagement, we're going to focus specifically on how do we manage people on a psychological level to ensure their level of engagement remains as high as possible. Right, so the world of work is changing, and as a matter of interest, it has been changing for a number of years, even before the current pandemic hit. Interesting research out of the UK and the US showed that 50% of UK and US workforce was already adopting remote working by the beginning of 2020. So not necessarily on a full-time basis, but working remotely, on and off, coming into the office 2 or 3 or 4 days a week, not being in the office every day, that kind of thing. So the remote working concept obviously was intensified extremely quickly by the current pandemic, but it is something that has been happening around the world already for the last 1 or 2 decades. However, we find that 22% of people, specifically those that work remotely, find it difficult to unplug after work. So working remotely obviously has some benefits, and we can have a little bit of a discussion about that later. But being able to almost compartmentalize work and home and those type of things becomes more difficult when your workplace and your home is the same place. And then very interestingly, 19% of remote workers struggle with loneliness. Even though they can talk to their colleagues on the phone and on Zoom and everywhere else, they still struggle with loneliness because they do not have the interaction with other people that they are normally accustomed to. Now, obviously, as I've said earlier, these were numbers that came out even before the global pandemic that we are currently facing started having its impact. But I think over the last 2 to 3 months, there was a funny meme. I don't know whom of you have seen it. The question was asked, who drove your digitalization of your business? And option 1 was the CEO. The option 2 was the chief technology officer. And the option 3, which was the one that most picked, was COVID-19 drove our digitalization, because it took away our choice. It basically said that you can't go into work. You are not allowed to work in the way that you have been working until now. And that has forced us to start this, or to accelerate this world of remote working. So today what we're going to do is, as I said in the beginning, we're going to start looking a little bit at how we manage people within the remote working environment. And perhaps before I go to the next slide and start talking about the theory, we have a specific philosophy at Thomas that basically says for 2 people to have a great relationship within the work environment, 3 things are needed. The first thing that is absolutely crucial is that I have to have an understanding of myself, my own behavior, my own preferences. The second thing that is crucial is that I have to have an understanding of who the person is that I'm dealing with. And the third one is that I have to have the willingness and the ability to adapt my behavior. Now, the philosophy behind that says we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. We cannot handle all people in the same way, because people differ and people have different behavioral requirements and different needs in terms of their emotions and everything. I'm going to tell you a very, very short story just to illustrate the point. I've been married to the same amazing woman for the last 26 years. And about 2 years into our marriage, I got home one day and I said to her, "My liefie," which is Afrikaans for my love, "I've got a surprise for you. We're going away for the weekend." My wife was very, very happy about my announcement that we're going away for the weekend. I didn't give her any heads up before then, so obviously she asked the question, "So which weekend did you have in mind?" This was 3 o'clock on a Friday, and I said to her, "I was actually thinking about this weekend. Like, we need to be at the airport in an hour and a half, so pack your bags, let's go." My wife did not appreciate that much. She burst out in tears. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. Initially, I thought they were tears of joy because I'm such a romantic husband, and she couldn't believe that I would do these amazing things for her, like a surprise weekend away. But I very soon learned that that was not the case. My wife was extremely upset about the fact that I did not consult her before, that I did not give her time to think about this, that I did not allow her time to prepare, and that I sprung a surprise on her like that. Now, some of you might think that's a woman thing as opposed to a man thing. That's not the case. Psychological research finds that the differences in emotions and behavior between men and women are actually substantially less than what we may think. This is a behavioral and personality difference between myself and my wife. And I will show you in a minute exactly where that came from. If we go to a basic theory that some of you may have seen in your lives, looking at behavioral styles, this is a theory also known as the DISC theory, because if you look at the corners, it spells dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And the reason I'm using this today is to give you a bit of a handle on how to manage different types of people. There are other theories available in the marketplace that you can definitely have a look at, but this one is quite easy to understand, even to somebody that is not a psychologist, and something that we find our clients use very productively in a management type of environment. So essentially, the DISC theory says that we view the world, our perception of the world is either that it's a hostile and antagonistic place, or that it's a friendly and favorable place. And then our reaction to this perception can either be active or it could be passive. And in brief terms, if you think about somebody that views the world as a hostile or antagonistic place, and they have an active response to that, we refer to that as dominance, the top left-hand quadrant. And those people we tend to find as being assertive, competitive, direct, driving, forceful, inquisitive, and self-starters. You may think of somebody in your business that has those qualities. You may think that you have those qualities yourself. But these guys are fighters rather than flighters. They don't stand back from conflict, and they are very much results oriented. I'm going to give you a word that I want you to write down somewhere, just to remember each of the quadrants. The word for dominance would be power. So it's all about power. If we look at somebody that perceives the world as a friendly and favorable place, but has an active response to that, we would find that to amount to what we refer as influence. And that means that this person is likely to be communicative, friendly, influential, persuasive, positive, and verbal. They are normally the life of the party. They are normally the one that, you know, makes all the jokes and that loves chatting to people, loves socializing, those type of things. And the key word there is people. So high influence means I am focused on people. If we move to the right-hand side of the four quadrants and we go to the bottom at steadiness on the right-hand side at the bottom, you will see that steadiness is a passive response to a perceived friendly and favorable environment. And we normally find that these people are amiable, deliberate, dependable, methodical, thorough, and persistent. And because there's a passive response, they tend to want to do things a little bit slower, but more thoroughly. So the key word that we're looking for there is pace. And incidentally, just to complete the story that I told about myself and my wife earlier on, I am very high on dominance. My wife is very high on steadiness, which means that if I book a surprise weekend, it's because I am in control, I have the power, I can do it, I like surprises, I'm quick-paced. When my wife had the reaction that she did to the surprise weekend away, it's not because she doesn't love me or because she doesn't want to go away on a weekend with me. It's simply because being more passive, she needs time to adapt. She needs time to prepare for things, and she doesn't like surprises, irrespective whether they are good or bad. Right. If we go to the top right-hand corner, you will find there the passive response to a hostile or antagonistic perception of the world. So if we think as dominance as fighting, compliance would be trying to protect yourself against hostility, trying to steer away from conflict. And these people we find have behavioral qualities such as being accurate, careful, compliant, logical, perfectionist, precise, and systematic. Generally, we find that people on the left-hand side of this model have a little bit of a ready, fire, aim type of approach. They do before they think. They do not necessarily think things through, and they are always up for a challenge and always ready for the new change and always very excited and always running at 100 miles an hour. Whereas people on the right-hand side of the quadrants or of the model, we find very often have an approach that says ready, aim, 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 fire. The question is, which is better? And there is no real answer. It depends entirely on the environment that you're in. And what we're going to do over the next few minutes is we're going to apply these behavioral styles to the environment that we are finding ourselves in at the moment. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I neglected to give you the P word for compliance. The P word for compliance is procedure. They're about policies and procedures and standard operating procedures. So just to run through that again, dominance is about power, influence is about people, steadiness is about pace. So I want to do things a little bit slower, but more thoroughly. and compliance is about procedure. Right. Now, the first question then is, what is your own communication style? From those 4 quadrants, obviously, to go back to the 3 things that I said was important, understanding yourself was the first one. So we need to try and understand what our own communication style is. Most of us would be able to place ourselves into 1 or 2 or 3 of those boxes, and it is possible that you could have a combination of different styles, not just one. So you could be a D with I, or a D with C, or a S with I, or whatever the case is. And the question then becomes, once you now start working with other people, how do you understand what their different communication styles are? At the end of this presentation, we will give you a link that you can click on to do a complimentary assessment to find out your own behavioral style. But you still need to assess, from observing your colleagues and the people working for you, what their different communication styles are. So let's start with the D again. If you're talking to somebody in your organization, they're brief in conversation, they do many things at once, they're a juggler, they see the big picture, and they're more focused on results and outcomes than on the smaller task or the process, chances are very good that that person is strong on the dominance factor. If you find in the bottom left-hand corner that somebody is typically high energy, they speak quickly and they like to tell stories like I just did. They like to talk about ideas and concepts and abstract things, and they like communicating verbally rather than in writing, chances are good that that person has a strong measure of influence in their profile. Bottom right-hand corner, if you find somebody that is that likes to focus on people and relationships, they're normally good listeners. They will listen more than they talk. They will give you their full undivided attention. They won't do 3 things while talking to, or while listening to you. And they're generally more focused on considering the needs of others. These people are carers. They care about their colleagues and about people around them. They support them emotionally. Chances are very good that that person has a strong measure of steadiness. And then in the compliance box, top right-hand corner, people with high-level compliance will focus on facts and detail more than the big picture. They typically try to avoid conflict, but they may be very assertive in their area of expertise. So if you find somebody that's a lawyer or an accountant or some technical expert, they will be very assertive in that area because they have the facts and the figures at the tips of their fingers, even though they might not be as assertive in other areas. So just to give you a quick idea in terms of how to identify different people, obviously, as I said earlier, you can do the assessment afterwards, but this will help you in terms of talking to your colleagues. The question then becomes, how do I adapt my style when I talk to people with these different preferences for behavior? So if I am dealing or communicating with a high D, I need to give them regular but concise updates. It can be in writing, it can be on a call, but it needs to be short and sweet and to the point. These guys like bullet points. They like, give me the short version, give me the 30 seconds, so I know exactly what you expect, or I have the big picture of what you expect of me. You need to ask them, remember they're about power and control, and you need to ask them what they need from you to help them deliver the results that you're looking for specifically in this environment. If you're looking, if you're communicating with a high I, bottom left-hand corner, you need to allow for regular face-to-face calls and impromptu catch-ups. Remember, these guys like surprises. They feel fantastic if the boss calls them unexpectedly out of the blue just to find out, how are you, what's happening, you know, are you okay, can I support you in some way? You need to give them time to talk so that you listen, and they need to have the opportunity to verbalize. These people, very often you will find, as we said, in their prefer face-to-face calls. So in the time of technology in which we live with Zoom and Skype and Teams and all those wonderful video technologies, obviously it allows them to see somebody face-to-face much more. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, there's an interesting difference between the high I and the high S. The high I, we said, appreciates impromptu calls and catch-ups. The high S would not appreciate that, because when you call the high S, they will have wanted time to prepare, to think about what it is that they want to discuss with you. So when you're dealing with a high S, we suggest a defined, structured plan of face-to-face updates. So you have an agreement. I'm going to call you on a Tuesday and on a Friday at 9:30, and we're going to set out half an hour. You can put it in your diary. This is the agenda. This is what I want us to discuss. And then focus your time on them. They need structure, they need support, and you need to ask them, what kind of support can we give you to work better in your current environment? And then the final one, the high compliance. These guys, as we said in the beginning, are all about facts and figures and details. So you need to provide them detailed updates, not the 5 bullet points that you give to the high D. You need to give them an agenda beforehand. These are the points that we need to discuss. This is all the detail. These are the spreadsheets attached that you might need. And then when we have the catch up, for them it's much more about the work, the detail, the minute things than it is about, you know, how are you doing and, you know, how's the kids and those type of things. The detail is extremely important to them, and therefore we need to ensure that they have access to as much detail as possible. Right. So the question then becomes, within the current context, what are the challenges to overcome when we are working remotely? Some of these things that we discuss now are a lot easier when we are in an office together. The social interaction, the impromptu meetings, having a face-to-face, one-to-one with somebody. Things like that are a lot easier when we're working in the same office building. However, working remotely, some of them might become quite difficult. So the high D, remember we said the keyword for D is power, and they may feel lost and disempowered at the moment. I find the people that struggle most in the current environment are probably salespeople, primarily because they are measured on results. And in the current environment, I don't know how many of you are in sales, but it is extremely difficult to get a hold of people, even though they're at home. It's extremely difficult to unlock budgets. And salespeople are suddenly faced with something that they've never experienced in their lives. And for us to keep our salespeople motivated at this stage is extremely difficult. They are likely to experience frustration, and they're likely to become blunt. They're likely to really not be nice to you when you start asking difficult questions. So we're going to look at how we solve that on the next slide, but we need to be very, very aware of the fact that those that are used to having the power of closing the deal and those type of things, they are some of the most disempowered in the current situation. The high I's also struggle, the high influencers. Remember, for them, it's all about people, and their productivity could drop because they don't have access to people as much as they had in the open office environment or in the office environment. They can't come over for a chat quickly, bounce an idea off you. They get energy from communicating with other people in a face-to-face verbal environment. And they're also very likely to experience loneliness, boredom, much quicker than most other profiles if you don't check in with them regularly. The high S, interestingly enough, we could actually find that the high S's and the high C's operate more productively in a remote environment because they provide structure to themselves. However, we could still find that the high S's feel isolated from their support networks. And remember what I said when I spoke about the weekend away. It's not that my wife didn't want to go on the weekend with me, but she needed time to adjust to the idea. High S's can handle change, but they do not cope well with sudden changes. So as far as a high S is concerned, it's important that we tell them what's happening. Even something simple like when we moved from level 5 to level 4 lockdown, the first question the high S will ask you is, how much time do I have to prepare before we return to work? Because suddenly you've now put me in a remote environment, and now you can't expect me to come back into work again on Monday if today, Thursday, is the last day of level 5, because I need to prepare, I need to put things in place, I need to get myself ready for that. So they are very highly structured, and they might struggle at the moment because of the fact that their support network is not with them right now. And then the high C's, the key thing for high C's, remember, is about policy and procedure. So we need to ensure that these guys are absolutely clear on everything that is required of them. They need detail. They need clear guidelines on what they need to achieve. And they are likely to experience frustration if they do not have clarity in times of change. So if the policy has changed, if the procedure has changed for doing something, that needs to be communicated to them in writing preferably. Right, so let's talk about how we support each profile while working remotely. We've touched on that already in the previous slide. So as far as high dominance people are concerned, as I said, you'll find a lot of them in the sales environment. So it is necessary that we need to adapt targets and performance metrics. So just something simple, it would be stupid at the moment to measure a salesperson on the number of face-to-face meetings they have during a week. You can change that to Zoom calls. You can change that to telephone conversations with clients or with prospects or whatever the case is. But it is important that we allow them to feel a sense of success. So even if it means that you change your activity for your salespeople to do more prospecting now rather than close the deals, because it's nearly impossible to close deals anyway, instead of having them sit, at home doing nothing, you can give them different kinds of targets to say, right, so now we need to move to more of a prospecting approach. If a high D is in a different environment, not in sales, exactly the same thing would apply. So you would look at the outcomes that you expect of them. They like to measure themselves on outcomes achieved. You would need to look at the outcomes and adapt those outcomes so that they can be busy and feel that they are reaching success and that they're still making a contribution to the business. As far as the high influencers are concerned, it's extremely important that we give them an opportunity to interact with people as much as possible. These guys need communication, verbal, they need to see somebody on a screen at least. So they absolutely love webinars, video conferences, anything that allows them to interact with people. In our own business, we have team meetings on a regular basis to make sure that the high eyes are engaged. And in some of those team meetings, we specifically set an agenda beforehand that has nothing to do with the business process and with the results that we're looking to achieve at the moment. We literally set up a video conference once a week at the moment with our entire team saying, tell us about how you're doing. How's the kids? What's happening at home? What are you struggling with? How's your emotions? Those type of things. It's important that we support these people, not just in terms of the work, but also in terms of the social interaction. And we need to show them that we're interested in their lives when we don't see them on a day-to-day basis. The high S needs communication forums. They need collaboration. They need to be able to interact with others, but more on a supportive level than on a work-based level. And they need structure. As we said earlier on, they need time to adapt to different ways of doing things. Generally, if you give a high S enough structure and you give them clarity in terms of what's expected of them and you give them a non-threatening environment, they are likely to be very, very productive. And then the high compliance, remember it's all about policy and process for them, or policy and procedure. So they need to know exactly what is expected of them. What is the new policy now? So I knew what the policy was when we worked in the office. We had a policy, for argument's sake, that lunch is between 1 and 2. These guys will literally ask you the question, am I allowed to take lunch at a different time now that I'm working from home? And they need clarity on that. They need absolute detail in terms of changes in policies and procedures, and especially with companies starting to return to the office in drips and drabs at the moment under level 4. Once that starts happening, we need to involve these people in terms of defining the processes that is required to return to the office. There's a whole raft of legislation and regulation around returning, and whether it's face masks or social distancing or hand sanitizer. And these guys will want to know that we as a business are complying with these, and they can be fantastically helpful in actually helping you to set out the details of returning to the work environment. Right, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it. Just a quick overview before we go to Q&A. We said that engagement is a factor of the quality of interaction with your manager. So the way in which your manager handles and manages you is likely to have a very, very high impact on your engagement level in the business. In the current environment, that's even more the case because we are working remotely. We also said that different people need to be managed in different ways. And for that reason, we need to ensure that we understand ourselves, that we understand the people that we're working with, and that we understand how we need to adapt and adjust our behavior in order to manage them in the best possible way. And then finally, we looked at the 4 quadrants of the DISC model. Dominance, keyword is power. It's about control and results for them. Influence, the keyword is people. It's about social interaction and communication. Steadiness, the keyword is pace. They tend to work a little bit slower, but more thoroughly. They want to plan better. They want to be prepared for what's coming. And then compliance, where the keyword is policy. So they want to know, what does the rule book say? What is the detail? What am I allowed to do? And how are we managing this by the book? As I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the webinar, we will put up a link in the chat area that you can click on, and then you can complete a complimentary assessment of your own DISC model. And we specifically have developed a remote working report that you will get on a complimentary basis as well, that will assist you to understand your own style in terms of remote working. Thank you very much, Vikeshini.
Thanks, Andries. I see we've got a few questions on the Q&A box. I don't know if you want to ask any of those. And in the meantime, if I can ask anyone who would like to raise a question using their mic, if you can please raise your hand. So again, if you look at your menu tab at the bottom, there's a raise hand functionality. And if you raise your hand, I will call you out and give you an opportunity to speak live.
Okay, right. The first question was, can we have a combination of those styles? Yes, absolutely. You can be a combination of steadiness and compliance, for instance, or of dominance and influence. Normally, we find the majority of people have a combination of 2 or maybe 3 factors. Some people have only 1 factor that is dominant. Sorry, not dominance as such, but a factor that is dominant out of the 4. So it's definitely possible. Francis asked, are there any tools that can assist you? Yes, as I just said, you are more than welcome to click on the link at the end of this webinar, and also the slides will be sent to you in PowerPoint format. So on the final slide, there will be a link that you can follow, and there you can actually get a complimentary assessment on your own DISC profile. Clive asked a very, very important question. Clive says, if you're a high C and your boss is a high D, sorry, it's gone down now, and you want to get things done, whose personality must lead? Can't we see the work at hand instead of personality? Clive, you are absolutely correct that the work needs to be done. And if we stand still at personality and we start, putting people in cotton wool and those type of things, then we're not going to get the work done. What psychologists in the business environment have found time and time again, however, is that people become more productive when you manage them in their preferred way. So going back to the example with me and my wife, I could have shouted and screamed and said, but you will go on this holiday with me because I am the man in the household and everything else. And that would have just led to more and more conflict, and my wife would have become disengaged. That might be a bit of an extreme example, but in the workplace, exactly the same. So if you are a high C leader and you absolutely require your people to comply with policies and procedures and rules and regulations, that's absolutely fine. But you need to understand that you're going to lose some engagement in the process. And we need to be adaptable. In the modern place of work, we cannot lead with a militaristic style. We cannot have authoritarianism. The primary reason being that it doesn't work in the long-term sustainable way. So essentially, people could accuse me of being manipulative, but in some cases, I will adapt my behavior to somebody simply because I know that's what I need to do to get the best out of them. And in the end, it's about the results. It's about getting the job done, but I'm going to get the job done much better if I adapt my behavior to you. Okay, so Malusi asks, is there a correlation between leadership roles and potential in the quadrants, i.e. does a certain category or group make better leaders? Malusi, no. We have a philosophy that says anybody can lead, but you will lead in different ways. So it depends on the organization. If you're leading a actuarial firm, for instance, or an auditing firm, and you're a high dominant person that pays no attention to detail, you're going to run into trouble. The leader of an actuarial firm or an auditing firm is much more likely to be somebody with a high steadiness or a high compliance, whereas in a sales-focused organization or something like that, you might find somebody with a high dominance stepping forward as leader. So different people lead in different ways, and there's nothing to suggest that a specific profile makes a better leader than another one. Is it possible to switch from one quadrant as part of personal development? Yes, absolutely. We find that people can develop what we call working strengths, and it is definitely possible to raise your game, so to speak, on something like compliance or something like influence, if you specifically set out to do that. Sorry, Vikeshni.
I've got two people that have got their hands raised. I'm going to give an opportunity to ask their questions. Timothy Anderson, I'm allowing you to speak. If you can please unmute your mic, and you can ask your question now.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, Andries. Two important characteristics that you didn't really mention were defensive and active resistance. And these are people who can quite easily become disengaged and actually cause problems. I presume they would be in the top right-hand block, the compliance, the procedural sort of people. And how do you deal with them?
Timothy, it's yeah, that's an interesting presumption, and I can neither agree nor I can neither confirm nor nor deny that they will be in that quadrant for fear of upsetting anybody. You can actually find passive resistance in many different quadrants, and the same for defensive. Somebody in high compliance can be defensive because they believe that they have followed the rules and regulations, and you're accusing them of not doing so. Somebody in a high influence could become defensive because they feel that you're attacking them personally and their reputation is at stake and they don't want to lose face. So you could find them in different quadrants. In terms of how to handle them, that would depend on which quadrant they're in. So if somebody becomes passive aggressive or very defensive and they are in the influence quadrant, for instance, I would take them aside and have a very private conversation with them. I have a policy as a manager anyway that says you praise in public, but you reprimand in private. But for the high I, that would be even more the case because they don't want to lose face. They don't want to look bad in front of other people. So they need to understand the seriousness of the situation, but at the same time, you're not going to do it where they lose face in front of others. If somebody is a high S and they become passive, passive aggressive or defensive, it might be because you haven't given them enough time. They're digging their heels in. They're saying, but hold on, I'm not ready for this change. And then you need to handle it in a different way. So it very much depends on the quadrant in which the person is. But getting back to the point, you can actually find those in all four quadrants.
Thanks, Andries. I see a comment from Simon in our chat functionality that says this model could be used for recruitment, seeing that for team success, you need a component of each. And I'm sure you can talk to that, but I can say from experience, I mean, the IODSA does do these tests when we are looking at senior management recruitment, and it does make a huge difference to understand where the teams are.
Yes, Vikeshni, you're absolutely correct. They definitely can be used as part of a recruitment function. And what the speaker said, or the person that asked the question, is absolutely correct as well. The ideal team is a team where you have people with different styles complementing one another. That once again depends on the functionality of that team. If we are talking about an organization or an office as an organism, then we need people with different profiles to complement one another. And if they understand each other, that's exactly what will happen. They will complement rather than be in conflict. If you look at different types of organizations, I mentioned earlier, a team of accountants might all have similar profiles, but that's okay as long as the work that is required of them, as long as their profiles are beneficial to the type of work that they're doing. But I would absolutely agree that in team building and in recruitment, that's one of the primary applications of these assessments.
I've got one more person with their hand up before we go back to the questions raised in the Q&A. Paco, can I ask you to please unmute yourself and you can ask your question? Paco? Okay, maybe while we wait for Paco, there is someone else, Tebogo. I'll allow you to speak. Please unmute your mic. Tebogo? Doesn't seem to be working. Okay, Andries, maybe in the meantime, do you want to answer some of the other questions that have come up in the Q&A?
Yes, I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. And if you forgive me, I'm going to skip a few that aren't really within my area of expertise. The one that I do want to address, Malose asked, which one is the best of the 4 quadrants or good for more productivity? I think I may have neglected to mention this in the beginning, but it's very important to understand that this is a non-judgmental assessment. It's a descriptive assessment. It's a little bit like asking, is it better to be tall than short? Is it better to have, you know, short curly hair or to have long blonde hair or whatever the case is? It's about describing people, and all of the 4 quadrants have their pros and cons. The key is in knowing yourself, being able to manage yourself, and then looking at the areas in which you may fall short and then developing yourself in those areas. But there's no such thing as a bad profile, if I put it that way. Let's have a look at 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah, we had one: in a typical workplace, should we be looking for combinations? Yes, if we're looking in a team environment, obviously that could be very, very helpful, Pami, to look at different people that complement one another. Guy Harris has an interesting question: are the different years of birth showing different profiles, millennials, baby boomers, and so on and so forth? We did some very interesting research on this, Guy, about 2 years ago. And we found, and I know that there are some people that are going to crucify me for this, but we found that the differences in personality remain constant across different groups. So while things like technology could have an impact on the millennials, for instance, and baby boomers grew up, you know, in a different age and all those type of things. And I know there's been a hell of a lot written about this, but we did not find any trend changes across different age groups, if I can call it that. We did not find any changes between baby boomers and millennials and the new X's, or, you know, whichever group we're looking at. We still have different personality types in all of them, and the differences are statistically not that big between those different groups. Okay. Question here: in this time of crisis, when things are changing rapidly, is it not more productive to be decisive, communicate clearly and regularly? This would probably upset I and S, but it is necessary in a rapidly changing scenario. Very, very good question, and a very, very good comment to say, yes, it will probably upset I and S because they need time to work. So currently, I think we are in a situation which is almost akin to a war. And if I can perhaps use a quote from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill said, if 2 people agree all the time, one of the 2 is unnecessary. Churchill, however, was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time of the Second World War, when decisiveness was absolutely crucial. So I would agree with the question, or the implied answer to the question. Yes, we need decisiveness. But that does not mean that we cannot communicate to the I's and the S's in a way that makes it easier for them to stomach the situation. Obviously, we're all in this together. And I've worked with many, many companies over the last few weeks that have had to go through retrenchments, that have had to go through salary cuts, that have had to change the entire way in which their businesses are structured. Yes, it is going to be more difficult for a high S to manage that. But sometimes you've got to bite the bullet. The key is to still communicate that to them in the best possible way, to give them the best possible preparation time to actually prepare for that. Okay. Okay, so interesting question here. Charles Cele said, how would you describe a person in a leadership role, never wanting to deal with tough matters, but willing to engage on other matters? Charles, that's a good question. And as leaders, we need to understand that we can't please all of the people all the time. I think the key thing there is fairness in the end, that you need to be tough on issues, but at the same time, you can be soft on people. Please note the difference. If somebody's behavior is not acceptable, you need to be tough on that. But it still doesn't mean that we treat people with lack of respect, or we don't have regard for their value as humans and as contributors. It's very important that we find that distinction. But yes, there are some leaders that go over to the other side, and they are willing to communicate and engage, and then when things get tough, they don't want to make the calls. Unfortunately, in a situation like this, especially as leaders, we need to make the tough decisions. We've seen that from our president, from a few other world leaders. You need to be willing to take the criticism. Otherwise, you're going to struggle as a leader in the long run. Vikeshni, shall I continue, or? Oh, there was one here, sorry. Satish said, lengthy and ineffective meetings have always been an issue in the workplace. Any tips for effective virtual meetings? Yes, Satish, there's an interesting function on Zoom. You can actually set the time of the meeting, and then it goes off after 30 minutes or an hour or something like that. Yeah, just everybody gets disconnected immediately. On a serious note, I think whether you're having a meeting in an office or on Zoom or whatever the case is, I think a clear agenda is important. What I mentioned earlier, what we do in our own team is we actually set separate meetings for discussing things and discussing people. Because what you'll find is, especially when people are isolated and lonely, people like the high eyes, during a Zoom call, they will want to talk all the time because they really have this need for socializing. If you give them that opportunity at a different call, so you can set up a meeting specifically to say, right, let's have a conversation about, how you're doing and what's happening and your emotions and everything else. Get that handled in a different meeting. And then you have a separate meeting to say, right, let's address the issues. Let's talk about what needs to change. Let's talk about the results and the policies and the procedures. Very often that person will then have had their opportunity to socialize, and they'll be happy to stick to the agenda. But I think clear agendas are absolutely crucial. Clear accountability is absolutely crucial. Every agenda point should have somebody that's responsible and a date by which it's completed or feedback is required.
Thanks, Andries. We had a member send us a few questions yesterday in preparation for today's session. And one of the questions asked, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, is if the social distancing policies go on for a while, how do you measure your employees' productivity and eventually review them on that work? I thought that was quite an interesting question that was raised.
Yes, that is a very, very interesting question, Vikeshni, and thank you for bringing that up. Personally, I think your measure of productivity shouldn't change that much when you're working remotely as opposed to in the office. I think we have moved beyond the time where we expect people to work hours, and we are now in a time globally, and we have been for a number of years. Management practice will show you, good management practice, that it's not about the amount of hours that you work, it's about the outcomes that you achieve. So when people work remotely, I think we should still clearly define the outcomes that we expect of them, rather than say, I'm going to have a Zoom call with you at 8:55 to make sure that you're in front of your computer, and I'm going to call you at 1:05 to make sure that you're on lunch. I mean, that is really not an effective way of managing people. So I think if we're working remotely and the social isolation remains the way it is, we need to clearly identify what are the outcomes, what are the processes, what are the things that we measure people by. And personally, I'm of the view that the measurement should not be time. If the person is a manual worker, yes, maybe then we can pay them by the hour and measure the hours that they've worked. But I think if the person is in any kind of an environment where their work can be outcomes based, then I think we need to move to that model. And that model doesn't really change whether you're sitting in the office next to me or whether you're working from home, as long as I can measure it in an objective way.
Great. Thank you, Andries. And I think with that, we'll end our session here. For those that are still listening and on, You will get the presentation slides in an email, followed with the link to the assessment that Thomas International has offered you. Please do complete that. I can attest from my own experience that it is really worth a lot understanding your own behavioral elements. And I think we can apply some of the stuff that you've talked to us today, both from a working and professional relationship perspective. Andries, we will look at any other FAQs or questions that were raised, and Andries and his team will get back to you personally if there's anything specific that you wanted to know. So rest assured, we will answer the questions that have been posed as well. So Andries, thank you very much for this informative session. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Vikeshni, I just see Guy says the link is not working. I don't know whether we've posted that in the chat already, or Guy, you won't be able to click on the link on screen because that's a shared screen, but you will receive the link in the email and then it should work there. Alternatively, you can just send an email to the email address there. Just mention that you were on the webinar and we will send you a complimentary assessment.
If you just stay on, I'll ask Vusi if you can maybe just put the link as well in the chat functionality for everyone. There was a question that was asked, Andries, of whether they can share this link with their teams.
I saw that, Bulelwa. Thank you for being honest enough to ask before sending it out. Can we ask, obviously this is our product, this is something that we sell, and when you complete the link, there will be an opportunity, or we will require your name, surname, the company, and so on and so forth. And I think we should allow something like, let's say, 3 assessments per organization, just to give you a bit of a chance to share that with your team. But if you send that link to 100 people, then obviously I can't provide that free of charge. This is our IP, but you are welcome to send it to 1 or 2 other people, and we will provide complimentary assessments to them as well.
Great, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Andries, thank you again for a wonderful session. Everyone, we look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week, Wednesday, and please enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.